Good morning, everyone. Every time I stand up to preach a sermon right after a reading from Howard Thurman, I'm always tempted to just go, what he said. So I don't know that there's anyone in recent memory, and by recent I mean in the last 100 or so years, who has said it as well as Howard Thurman has. Choir, thank you again for singing under some adverse circumstances. You all sounded wonderful, and we are so blessed by your presence today. Well, it is so very good to be with you this Easter morning and on this beautiful day. It's great to see so many new faces today, and a reminder that if you've just started attending and if you're here for the very first time, we certainly invite you to participate in all the activities after the service. And there will be a newcomer circle, which I will be at, and out on the patio from the back door of the social hall. So if you have a few minutes, it only lasts 30 minutes, and if you have a few minutes, grab some food and come and join us. So I'm happy to be back with all of you after being away for almost 2 weeks. My spouse Carol and I took a vacation, a dream vacation that we've only been talking about for like 25 years, to Spain, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time. The people, the food, the history, the culture, the art, the architecture, there's no way I could sum it up in a few words. But I will say that if there was one aspect of our adventure, and I'm going to call it an adventure, that really stood out, it had to be the incredible number of churches that we visited. It's a kind of an affliction that I have, and I think I've passed on to my wife. In fact, when I was posting some of our pictures on my Instagram account, I would always put hashtag church crawling as opposed to bar crawling or pub crawling. So now, of course, all these churches were Catholic churches, and most were built at least 500 years ago. But it's important to note that these church buildings aren't simply relics from history. They remain active religious communities. Carol and I witnessed a couple of masses, a lovely evening choir concert, and yes, even a wedding or two. Now, before you think that Carol and I were auditioning for a sequel to the movie Wedding Crashers, I took these pictures outside, they had the doors open, and I zoomed in, so I don't think we were disruptive, but I probably was violating some clergy rules by peeking my head in at a wedding that I was not officiating at or invited to. Now, Carol and I flew back from Spain last Sunday, which of course was Palm Sunday and the beginning of Holy Week for Christians. Holy Week in Spain is called Semana Santa, and I'm not sure there is anything quite like it in the world. There are sacred celebrations and beautiful, colorful religious processions, including the carrying of these kind of, I don't know how to describe them, sort of religious sacred floats that are called pasos, which are, like I said, basically sort of floats that have statues and other sacred objects that are borrowed from local churches. Now, one evening while Carol and I were walking back to our hotel when we were staying in Cordoba, we came across what appeared to be a kind of practice session or rehearsal for the Holy Week procession. There were about 20 or 30 people, I think most of them were men, called costaleros, carrying one of these pasos, which was covered by a red cloth. And there was also a leader who shouted very precise instructions, and there was even a knocker that he would knock on. Here's a picture of them inside the church. It's quite a thing to see them maneuver this thing inside of a church. I'm not sure if this was a rehearsal or if the statue had been taken out of the church, but it was, and we just totally stumbled upon this by accident. And I have to say that what really impressed us was how precise their steps were and that everything was done in unison. The timing and precision were incredible, and we could only imagine the amount of training and time and practice that it takes. Now, I must say that watching this Paso being carried reminded me of just how centrally important Easter is for our Christian siblings. It's almost as if the Castelleros and the generations who have participated in Semana Santa in Spain are preparing for the most important and extraordinary moment in their lives, in their religion, perhaps in human history. Something miraculous, something that transformed the world from darkness to light, and that still brings renewed joy and hope. Something's coming. Now, I have to say that as a Unitarian Universalist who reads religious texts spiritually and metaphorically rather than literally, I have to say I've never quite known what to make of the Easter story. In the midst of the depths of despair after his brutal execution, Jesus' followers and disciples began to experience him in a new way. Just a few days earlier, their hopes and dreams had been shattered as Jesus was arrested, tried, and crucified on what has come to be known as Good Friday. The story tells us that days later, Jesus was resurrected and began appearing to his disciples and followers. Now, as I said, I tend to read stories like this metaphorically, and let me just simply remind us that Unitarian Universalism doesn't take an official position on what exactly happened on Easter morning. As a UU, you are free to believe in the literal truth of the story and the resurrection, to read it symbolically or metaphorically, or to pay no attention to it at all. The choice is yours. But as I reflect on the meaning of the Easter story, I'm always reminded of another miraculous transformation and resurrection that brings my life great joy and that always enables me to find hope. And that is the annual coming of spring and the return of warmth and life after the cold of winter. Now, as I get older, I must confess I'm becoming less and less of a winter person. I grew up on the west coast of Florida, and I didn't see snow until I went off to college up north in my late teens. And I have to say that when I first went north, I thought winter was amazing. Of course, I hadn't shoveled snow yet. The beauty of gently falling snow and the way a snow or ice storm transforms a landscape into a winter wonderland, that struck me as nothing less than miraculous. But the longer I've lived now in colder climates, at least climates that get winter, the more I've come to appreciate warmth, warmer temperatures, and to yearn for spring. Usually around mid to late February, I begin to feel weary of cold and darkness, and that weariness often translates into what I can only describe as a kind of heaviness of spirit. I don't know if it's the cold, the darkness, the barrenness of the land, or some combination of all three. But as the month of March approaches, I continually find myself asking, and maybe even whining a little bit, when is it going to warm up? When is this darkness and bleakness going to end? And most importantly of all, when can I finally break out my favorite pair of shorts? And then, slowly, everything begins to change. Tiny buds and shoots begin to break through what had been a cold and barren ground. And if, on a particular morning, if I'm up early enough and step outside, I will invariably hear, for the first time in a long time, this magnificent sound. I don't know what it is about birds and their amazing songs. Every time I hear them near the beginning of spring, I just have to say something inside me is stirred, something that takes the chill and the darkness off of my spirit. It's almost as if the birds are reminding me that no matter how cold the temperature, how dark the night, or even how heavy my heart, there is always a reason to hope. There is always joy, and there is always a reason to sing. No matter how cold or dark the winter has been, the birds return every spring to sing life and light back into being. And when they sing, I somehow just know that there is nothing in this world, however terrible or dark, however frightening or fearful, there is nothing that can change the fact that life is ultimately beautiful and a blessing. Birds and their songs are harbingers of hope and joy. Hope for a new day, hope for a new beginning, and hope for renewed faith in the miracle and possibilities of life. And it is that unshakable faith in life that is at the heart of what Howard Thurman calls the glad surprise. The glad surprise occurs in that moment, in that precious and miraculous moment, when light and life prevail over darkness and death. It is the moment when a beautiful sunrise emerges at dawn, when birds sing their first songs of the season, and as Thurman says so beautifully, when swelling buds and delicate blossoms proclaim an entire world of newness everywhere. But it's important to remember that spring is pointing to a deeper truth. According to Thurman, the rising sun and the return of songs and blossoms point to something basic about life and about the nature and meaning of existence. Darkness and despair touches us, and boy, there is plenty of it to go around these days. But we must always remember that life is a gift and a blessing, and that life is grounded in and rooted in the glad surprise. And I believe it is this recognition and appreciation for life's ultimate blessedness that is at the heart of what it means to have faith. Now, I know the word faith can be challenging for Unitarian Universalists, especially since it is often equated with creeds or dogmas or accepting a single answer or a single sacred text, a single answer to the great mysteries of existence. But I want to propose that we see faith not as being about creeds, but rather as an affirmation that no matter who we are or where we come from, we are journeying together on sacred ground. Faith, in this view, is a quiet confidence and expectation that life is ultimately grounded in hope, ultimately grounded in joy, and ultimately grounded in the glad surprise. And what are the consequences of living one's life with this understanding of faith? It means that for all of the challenges and struggles that we face, there is always the promise and the possibility of new life, new beginnings, and a better, more beautiful tomorrow. Having this kind of faith is not a guarantee that everything will be okay or turn out for the best. But having faith in life, having faith that spring will follow winter, that light will follow darkness, having that kind of faith can enable us to live every day, including dark days like we are experiencing right now, can enable us to live these days with hope and gratitude and the promise of joy. Now, as I read the Easter stories, I can't help but think that this understanding of faith as confidence in the ultimate goodness and hopefulness of life, confidence in the promise of the glad surprise, I think this understanding of faith is also at the heart of Easter. Let me explain. Whenever I reread the Easter stories in the Christian Gospels, the first thing I notice is that they all take place at daybreak. Some of Jesus' followers, all of whom were women, journeyed to the tomb very early on what we now call Easter morning, bringing spices to anoint his body. I can only imagine what those women must have been thinking and feeling as they made that journey. Their leader, their prophet, their hope for a new Israel and a better world, that leader had died. The pain and sorrow of Jesus' death must have been overwhelming, and it must have felt as if a giant stone had been rolled in front of their hearts and their hopes. Now again, I'm using my imagination here, but as those women walked to Jesus' tomb, I'm imagining that they would have seen the sun rising in the east. They may very well have heard bird songs welcoming a new day. And in that moment, I imagine those sights and sounds help them begin to make another kind of journey, a journey from the despair and sorrow of Jesus' death to the beauty and hope that was his life. Think for a moment about what Jesus of Nazareth brought into the world. He affirmed the beauty of life, the power of love, and the promise of the glad surprise. He lived as if all life and all people are a blessing and a gift from God. No one was beneath or beyond his concern or undeserving of his love. More than anything else, Jesus celebrated life and sought to transform a broken and hurting world into a beautiful springtime of love, hope, and joy. And as those women made their way to the tomb on that first Easter morning, with the beauty of the sunrise and the bird songs, Jesus' love and spirit, I imagine, stirred in their hearts. They began to feel and experience Jesus not as a brutalized victim of state tyranny, but as the prophet and the Messiah who changed their lives and would change the world. Although his body had been broken and his physical life ended, Jesus' love and his light were resurrected in their lives and in their hearts. To borrow Richard Gilbert's beautiful phrase, when it comes to the love and light of Jesus, a tomb is indeed no place to stay. And that, friends, for me, is the promise and possibility of not only Easter morning, but every morning. Darkness, sadness, sorrow, they are part of our lives and part of our world. But they do not have the final say. The chill and bleakness of winter will be followed by the warmth and the rebirth of spring. Flowers will bloom. Birds will sing. Life and love are simply too powerful, too bountiful, and too blessed. For all the struggles and the darkness that seem to fill our days, may we always remember that joy, beautiful, beautiful joy, most assuredly comes in the morning. Amen. Happy Easter and blessed be.